Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Linder, your host of the Innovation Storytellers show. I am really excited for our guest today because both he and I are fired up. We are fired up about innovation making an impact. We are fired up about the climate, especially in light of the recent hurricanes that we've just seen in Florida and in North Carolina and in the South, not to mention the long-term impact that all of us hope to make with the innovations that we bring to the fore. At least I hope we do, right? Where this isn't just a giant cash grab, but rather an opportunity to bring real value to people that lasts. And maybe especially for some of us that are in a later stage in life that we really want to make sure that we're making a lasting impact. That's going to be the focus of the conversation that we're having today. And it's why I'm really excited for my guest. With decades of operating, investment, and board experience, Rob Majteles focuses on impact as the driving factor in entrepreneurial success and is passionate as an advocate for climate and sustainability growth initiatives that both serve the planet and create enormous financial wins. I can't imagine why else we're doing this work. After earning degrees from Columbia and Stanford Law School and a brief stint as a lawyer and an investment banker, Rob felt something was missing in his career. He yearned for the entrepreneurial spirit he's been raised with, as his father, a Holocaust survivor, started his own business shortly after arriving in the US. When a struggling investment banking client offered Rob a chance to join their company, he jumped at it. And it wasn't long before he was asked to be the company's CEO. Despite the odds, the company sold a few years later to the benefit of shareholders, employees, and customers. And that experience was a turning point for Rob, igniting his passion for innovation and defining the ways in which Rob could lead and contribute as an entrepreneur. Rob went on to become the CEO of several tech companies, two of which generated superior investment returns for shareholders. And he has served on and chaired boards for both private and public companies, in addition to his work as a fund advisor and investment committee member for a wide variety of investment funds. And prior to joining Mach 49, Rob founded Treehouse Capital, an active personal investment vehicle he still leads today. Rob, I can't thank you enough for joining me. This is one of these fortuitous meetings over Twitter that winds up generating a lot of interest in mutual topics and mutual experiences and mutual past experiences from our families too. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Susan. I'm really grateful to be here. I love the podcast you've been doing. I'm humbled by the invite to be here. What I've loved about the podcast is you and your guests have always inspired me, and you've also left me with to-do lists, things I could do better, things I should be doing, things I could think about. And so I've been inspired by your podcast for a very long time, since you started it back during the awful days of the pandemic. And so I'm just thrilled to be here, and I hope to add value to your audience in any way I can.
Well, let's get to it. So, how did you even come to innovation? So we heard from your bio that you were inspired by your dad, who was an entrepreneur just like mine. Unlike your dad, though, my dad was a failed entrepreneur. He was not great at running his own business. I did not take inspiration from my dad. On the contrary, I actually looked at my dad and go, here's the what not to do when it comes to entrepreneurship. So tell us, how did you come to innovation?
Sure. First, would you mind a few definitional items? Because as I prepared for this, I wanted to try to make sense. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of different things, and I was thinking about your audience. And so to make sense of it, there are three topics: entrepreneurship, innovation, and impact, that'll become relevant when we talk about, at least for me, my progression and career. When I think about entrepreneurship, the best definition I've ever been able to come across is the ability to create results well in excess of any resources available to you to create those results. And so I paused there for a minute. My father taught me that. Just this incredible, grounded, earthy entrepreneur, bottom up, no money, and created a great series of business successes around the company he created. Second topic in innovation for me: innovation is a choice. It's a choice about committing yourself to something greater than yourself to create those entrepreneurial returns. And so my journey has, as a CEO, as an investor, as a board member, has sort of captured in me a spirit for entrepreneurship, creating results far in excess of the resources available to me, innovation, the choice to commit myself to something greater than myself as a way to drive those entrepreneurial returns. And then impact, where I've always focused, and in the recent years have been rejuvenated to make the primary focus of the next third, not wood, of my career going forward.
The other piece of your background that's really fascinating to me is we're both children of immigrants, right?
Mm.
And your dad was a Holocaust survivor. Can you just share a little bit about how that impacted your mindset as an entrepreneur and an innovator?
Sure. Both my parents were Holocaust survivors, actually,
Mm.
and they were great people and great parents. I was gifted in many ways with them, far beyond entrepreneurship. But to the question of entrepreneurship and those experiences, they they taught me both, and my father in particular, in the business sense, that the greatest asset you can have as an entrepreneur is how you treat people.
Mm.
There was no reason for his. My father was in the raw material for leather products business when New York City, the meatpacking district, when it was an actual meatpacking district. In some ways, you could view what he was in as a commodity business. What's the difference between his raw material for leather products, calfskins, and somebody else's? But he created margin and differentiation because of the way he treated people. People love to work with him. They love to compete with him. They love to work with him. They just love the way he treated them. And I always knew that was special. And I've always kept that in mind as a secret sauce for any entrepreneur to keep in mind.
Mm.
Boy, it's a good question. What did I learn? I learned so much from them both, but that one comes to mind on the entrepreneur side immediately. Always has.
Yeah. My dad was not a camp survivor, but my dad was a Holocaust refugee, and
Mm.
all of his family, with the exception of his parents, were murdered in
Mm.
concentration camps during the Holocaust in Germany
Mm.
and in Czechoslovakia
Mm.
when it was Czechoslovakia back in the day. And there's something about, I find this with other friends who had come from a similar background. There's something about a different understanding of time, how precious these
Mm.
moments are, and that we don't have time to sit around and wait or bullshit to think about trying to make an impact, because there's a sense that maybe tides can turn and things can be taken away, and we have to make impact where we can.
Yeah, I love that reflection. My father was liberated from Dachau. My mother hid during the years of the war in a
Oh,
basement. But these are such dynamic and important topics, particularly today, Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur,
I
sure.
appreciate you bringing it up on a moment of reflection. The issue of time and entrepreneurship. I have a funny story for you about something my dad taught me when I started running my own companies, and I would ask him about this or that or the other. When I was the CEO, he would always laugh at me and say, "I'm a fast moving person." But my father's time and my fast moving were different. And so he would always tell me, boy, why do you, what's all the discussion about? You're either going to be right or wrong. Who the hell knows? Just try it.
Oh.
If you're wrong, stop doing it. And if you're right, do more of it. Like, what are you worried about? So lots of experiences that I love to share about that part of my life. And they've informed, I've been lucky to get a lot of great formal education. But honestly, what I learned from my parents and from my father in his factory, probably the foremost reasons why I've been able to create whatever successes I've been able to.
Yeah, so let's talk about these three pillars that kind of gird your
Mm-hmm.
professional life and your aspirational life too. So started with entrepreneurship, right? So you built a company, sold a company, made
Mm-hmm.
everybody a lot of money, and that felt great. What was the innovation that was stored inside of that organization, and what was it?
Yeah, great question. So the early part of my career, the first three companies I ran were all entrepreneurship. And as I look back, I was an inadequate innovator as the CEO of those companies. I was really focused on the make outsized returns beyond the resources available to me. I was really focused on being scrappy and successful, and it created a scale of return. But as I look back, I was so committed to the mechanism of the P&L, of running the company, of executing in a certain way. I I left returns, and I didn't embrace innovation enough, the willingness to commit to something greater than myself enough to really unleash creativity that may have created even more success in those companies. The innovation part for me and that lesson learned is what drove me over the last 20 years as I became a board member, an investor, a fund advisor. I always look to try to cultivate in the CEOs and founding teams their spirit of innovation to make sure that they were doing better jobs than I did. I was a productive CEO, but I wasn't good as an innovative leader. And it really made me treat those people who are good at that differently. It made me realize there's a difference in the way they did the job and I did. And it made me a force multiplier as a board member to be aware of those things. So
Mm.
the innovation piece is something I've worked on as a board member and fund advisor over the last 20 years to get good at. And I'm still working on it.
So what do you think thinking about the skill set of being innovative? It's one thing to look at a company and go, okay, you feel the hot breath of competition on your neck. You feel the
Mm,
board members who are going more sales, like cut
mm.
costs, let's go. Is Did you find yourself innovating in the way that you were just operationally bound, in the way that you were thinking about running it, or
Yeah,
did that come later?
yeah, hey, this is great. This is like a therapy session for
Lay down on the couch. Let's get into it.
I was a CEO, but I'm much better now. My well, it's a great question. So as I reflect back in those periods of time and what I felt bound by and the question of innovation and why I wasn't open more to it, it's fair to say in each of those cases, I created an excuse in my mind that we didn't have sufficient resource to pull the pull the bow harder, to send an arrow further. And
Mm,
so I allowed that to become an excuse to not engage in it, not just longer term thinking, but the more creative commitment to things bigger than what I could see immediately in front of us. And these were all tech companies, and we had a reasonable roadmap and we did all our things, but I was definitely geared towards what I can attach to a customer now or near term or midterm. And I was definitely not attached to the kind of innovation that goes beyond what the customers think they know they want now. And I wasn't successful. I wasn't invested enough in that process to unleash the great people I got to work with to think beyond the bounds I set for them. So on boards that I've been on since then over the last 20 years and funds that I've been able to advise, I start from the perspective that there's got to be something greater than the individual components of what we can see in front of us now. And that's made me a force multiplier on the innovation side as a
mm,
board member over the years. And several years ago, it's what brought me to be invited to become a board member in residence with Mach 49, which brings venture driven growth to large scale corporates around the world, where I get to join boards and internal boards of large scale corporate clients trying to bring innovation focused growth to their portfolio. And I get to help them do that there. And so that's the progression I've been on. And impact is adding to it now.
yeah. So let's talk about like what are some of the nudges that you might give a startup that's in from the boards that you've been on that to help them to push them to think a little bit more innovatively, especially when you're advocating, right, at a place like Mach 49, when you're advocating for to bring the best startups and the best, how do you nudge each side of that equation to be their best?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I over the years I've learned there's absolutely no difference between being a force multiplier in this way for a startup CEO or for someone who's running a Fortune 500 company. The
Mm-hmm.
zeros involved are different. The topics are the same. And I've never seen a difference. And I get better at it when I recognize that. They all have their resource components. But the nudges, how to get innovation to become a priority, for me comes to how you help them think about impact, how you frame impact, how you focus it, how you measure it, how you create a system of confidence to create it. And when you focus and measure and create a system of confidence to deliver impact with an impact framing roadmap, the time dimension is where the innovation comes up because the nudge is, all right, here's where you are today. The impact you want to create, is it going to come? Are you going to create it in the next 12 months? If the answer is yes, you say, great. Now let's up rev that. What can we do in 12 years, not just 12 months? And then the roadmap itself starts to require attention because when we're looking for focused innovation, impact, when we focus on how to define, align, and execute inflection points, not when I talk about impact, I don't talk about KPIs. You can accomplish 90% of your KPIs and lose. It's
This is so like I could do a whole show on shitty KPIs, right? And like
Oh, and
really
well, see, the
creating
thing
those
is
impossible.
they all end up shitty. It's like a
Right.
mountain climber who's measuring the amount of rope they use, which of course is important. Okay. But you want to climb the damn thing and get home alive. That's
Right.
the impact. And so
Right.
we get confused, often all of us, with what is necessary but not sufficient, right? And so the KPIs just make you feel better. And of course, you got to measure rope. I get it, okay? But that's not the impact we're after. But going back to your question about nudges and innovation, to me, all of this comes together when we do impact framing and we think about impact, not KPIs. We think about inflection points, near and long term. And we commit to define, align, and execute a roadmap of these things over a course of time. And then on Monday, I'm asking you with equal intensity, what are you doing Monday for now? And what are you doing on Monday for 10 years from now? Here's our roadmap. It all has to be happening. It's not a rolling 10 years. You got to execute these things every day, long term, short term. It doesn't make any difference. Every day you got to commit to the roadmap that you said defines the impact you're creating in this world. Boy, I over answered your question about nudges, but there's a whole series of them that I've learned to put together in this thing I call impact framing.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because it's one of the most fascinating parts of your work because it's helping us to think about, okay, how do we take this idea and maybe we'll just create some scenarios so people can really
Mhm.
feel what
Sure,
impact framing feels like for a company when they decide to use this framework. And they
sure.
also start off, maybe we take one step back and talk about intention setting
Yep.
because maybe we just focus on making the widget, making lots of money with the widget and selling the company or hitting some kind of hyper growth or going IPO. All perfectly good goals,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
As a young entrepreneurial company or to gain some kind of strategic investment from a large corporate to nail your first corporate customer. But how do we start off by setting when we do impact framing, how do we start off with the intention in order to come up with the impacts?
I love that question. So there's a couple of things we do. First, we ask a simple question a million times, and that question is in three flavors. What's the strategic impact that defines success? What's the financial impact that defines success? What's the team impact that defines success?
Hmm.
We ask that question, we expect answers, and then we constantly ask, how do you measure whether you're creating that success or not? And a good number of the things you just mentioned are lagging indicators. People fall victim to using lagging indicators as their measurement. This amount of sales, often in the corporate setting, when we do these innovation things with Mach 49 with great clients, they'll say, well, I want 1 billion in sales in the next 3 to 5 years, or I don't care. I mean, well, that's a great goal, but it's a lazy one from the impact framing perspective because whether I achieve it or not, I can't tell you until 3 to 5 years is up. So it either happened. What can I do about that? That's an outcome. It's not an input. What are the leading indicators? Uh, so we combine this understanding of measurement, leading indicators, and a focus on singular statements of strategic, financial, and team impact. That's how we start this journey always. And we try to engage a lot of different perspectives, boards, executive teams, customers, my own perspectives, our own perspectives as entrepreneurs. And we arrive at a singular statement of strategic, financial, and team impact embedded in a roadmap, shows me time and impact and inflection points. And we define, a line, and execute the heck out of that thing, including earning the right to be wrong about it. And the issue of focus always comes up at the start. We're not focused, but when you then get into the world and things change, your team, if they're any good, will react to that change. But how often will they know to go back to the shared truth we started the journey with and change it at the core?
Hmm.
And when they don't
So
do that, we end up a mile wide and an inch deep, and no one's accomplishing any impact, and we get mad and frustrated with each other. So it's about focus, measurement, and a system of confidence to create this roadmap.
so tell us a story now of a company that's followed this impact framing
Yeah,
process and how they did it so we can
yeah,
really feel it.
yeah. I can tell you about a number of different ones. And when we talk about impact, sometimes the impact is societal and broad. Sometimes it's to the company situation, more narrowly focused within themselves and who they are. So we don't prejudge impact as necessarily being what we can think of as societal impact. However, when we think about innovation, and we particularly think about this moment we're all sharing on the planet, it's impossible to ignore the vast opportunities associated with climate and sustainability impact and be any sort of credible business person. It's just impossible. There is no bigger market opportunity than to get these things right, and there's no bigger risk to your business than getting them wrong. So increasingly, impact is getting defined and must be defined as climate and sustainability impact and other things, but I don't prejudge it. In terms of
Okay.
stories, different clients, different things, but as an example, Um, a large scale global entity focused on, let's say, broadly speaking, the agricultural markets and the processes of generating their revenue over the many years they've been in business involve fossil fuels, involve a wide array of impacts that they historically have not accounted for, carbon and carbon equivalent impacts, and the emerging class of natural capital impacts, land use, water use, and biodiversity. This company has made the commitment to embed those impacts in their risk analysis of their own business and to try to redefine themselves going forward as creating climate and sustainability value added revenue. And they've done a baseline analysis of their own work and where they stand and how much of their current business is value added from a climate and sustainability perspective, embracing all of those impacts and the complexity of the calculus. Most people run away from the complexity of calculating these impacts. We always advise you should run to that complexity because that's where the opportunity sits. Anyway, this client took this to heart, is in the middle of doing this work. When they look at their core business, maybe 10% of it, maybe 10% of it survives that test of creating climate and sustainability value added revenue. That's quite a shock to the system to think of 90% of your business, hard fought, hard won, as not creating the kind of value added revenue that defines your success strategically, but it's also the truth. And so they've created a roadmap to turn that around and to grow on that basis. So that's one story that's in flight. Have another large scale enterprise that I'm helping as a force multiplier on the board. This company is in a raw materials chemistry sort of company, reasonably sizable. They have an array of operational challenges and longer term questions that they're frustrated by.
Mm.
And so in this case, the impact, the strategic impact is to somehow come up with what is the right focus on solving our operational challenges and the fact that we don't have growth markets. We're not in the growth markets that we need to be in. They find themselves spread thin and attrition isn't good and their innovation internal assessment isn't good. So they have an enormous array of near-term operational challenges, and they know they have long-term markets they need to get going in, and they find themselves struggling to balance those equations. So with impact framing, we define a strategic objective that weights, that puts an actual weight to how much time we spend on improving our attrition rate in the next 6 months and how exactly we're going to do that, with simultaneously identifying the roadmap events for expanding into new markets. Which new markets, on what basis, and what's the cadence of impact today that I need to see to make me believe I'm going to be in those markets in 2 or 3 years. So some of those are internal milestones. We're on a business plan approved, funded, first product, first idea. We put as much energy behind the innovation roadmap for new markets many years from now in the same bucket as solving an attrition problem today, right now. And we solve them both today, right now, and just keep the roadmaps going.
So
Those are two
what's
examples, but we have others.
so what's the impact that you've seen? Like concretely, how is the founder kind of feeling that these issues have really been settled? Like, are
Yeah.
these are these happening on a quarterly basis, or like how do you know when you're hitting it?
Yeah, excellent. So in these cases, these are large scale enterprises, global and in the kind of billions of revenue. So it's different than the founder startup setting. So in those cases, it's a never ending process of measuring whether you're hitting your roadmap impact milestones. It never ends. And so we score in the one case, what's the impact value added revenue? Did we generate that or not? And are we generating on the perspective that we have? The art form there is the analytics of impact. It's challenging for carbon and carbon equivalents, but not impossible because carbon has a price. We just refuse to pay it, or we make everybody else pay it and don't make the polluter pay it. But the emerging class of natural capital impacts, water use, land use, and biodiversity, harder to calculate. This company has engaged, embraced the challenge of calculating those impacts and is bringing that forward as part of their solution. So how do they know they're making progress? Are they a magnet for incoming interest in all of these topics? Do their customers seek them out for these solutions? And are they generating the kind of impact revenue we're describing? The other company, the other example I gave, when they come up with their vitality index, sort of a strategic index that scores and weights today's operational issues with a higher weight than they should have 2 years from now, right? And they put a weighting to it. They look for they measure themselves, they self-assess, they baseline. They have a score of X. Tomorrow they want it to be X plus one, and then X
Mhm.
plus two, and then X plus four. And what we do every day, and I'll describe the cadence in a minute, is we try to ask, okay, we're hitting our impact metrics. Does it matter? Are we winning? Maybe we should change. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe the theory we had about our launch impact framing is incorrect. It's not creating wins in the marketplace. All right, what did we learn? Let's change and readjust. The cadence of this: weekly with an exec team, with a CEO, monthly with an exec team, quarterly with a board. On the roadmap, we make that the priority item in that cadence.
Yeah. And so, an example of some of these impacts that some of the companies have set for themselves, what do they sound like? I mean, I'm really trying to picture it in my head as a company. Is it like, I want to reduce our carbon footprint by X%, or I want to ensure that the supply chain that we're working on is,
Yeah.
yeah, what do they sound like? I'm trying to,
It'll vary. I'll give you one that's a newly spun out entity that has as its strategic objective removing 75 trillion BTUs of fossil grid demand from the US healthcare system.
okay. And now in English,
They're going to reduce the fossil grid demand of hospital systems in the US dramatically.
the fossil grid demand, is that
Right.
my electrical inputs? Is that what, when I hear
So it's
BTUs, is that
all it's all the non-renewable energy hospital systems use to keep themselves running.
and what's an example of that? Are these like generators, or is
Yeah,
this
so right
electricity?
now, hospitals like everybody else, they get well. Hospitals have a 24/7 energy demand need, and so they fuel themselves with coal, with gas, with whatever the available grid is available to them, and it's tragic. If you look at I'll tell you how this company measures its success in a minute, which was your question. But when you look at a hospital system that's getting whatever percent of its energy from coal, you ask them, how much lung cancer are you responsible for in your community? Are you better off just shutting down to save more lives than to continue to consume coal? What are you doing?
Wow. So the hospital is actually creating lung cancer in its community,
Well,
but based on its by
anybody who's
default, right?
by
Based on its
default,
whole
any of
usage.
us who are
Right.
allowing coal or the
Right.
pollutants in non-rural. So the reason why they talk about BTUs and fossil grid demand, this company is because that's how the hospitals think about it. That's the
Mm,
customer's terminology. For you
right.
and I, as climate sustainability, that's about the 75 trillion BTUs of fossil grid demands, about 5 million tons of carbon. So this company is targeting removing 5 million tons of carbon out of the US healthcare system. It's a huge endeavor. And when they do that, when they get the 75 trillion BTUs or the 5 million tons of carbon out, they save their clients about $1 billion, of which they'll get a piece.
Wow.
It's a share of savings platform. It's an outsourced energy management platform, and we'll get a share of the savings because there's no daylight between climate impact and P&L impact. It's the same question. And so we'll save them about $1 billion. We'll get a cut of that. And this company just launched, has 3 customers. At the board meeting I just saw a part of, all right, so we're supposed to get 5 million tons of carbon. It's been 3 months. We've got 2 customers. Here's 1,000 pounds of carbon we took out. Like, just we got 4,999,900 to go, but we got it. Okay, we're supposed to save everybody $1 billion over time. We saved $300,000. We got a lot. We had a lot to go, but they took their roadmap and said, here's our first quarter of operation. We got 3 customers, and here's what we did. That's what they know. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like we're actually executing the roadmap because we
Yeah.
score it a certain way and we look to the metrics and say, are we doing it or not? And
So
just one more. So with this question, what does it feel like to know that you're creating impact? You put the impact and the leading indicators of it on the same footing as the lagging indicators you get from finance. Everybody sits at every board meeting, and of course, you look at the P&L and do we hit the budget? Do we not hit the budget? I got a budget for impact. In fact, my budget for impact drives my P&L. It's a leading indicator that my P&L deserves to exist and can generate those results. It is the leading indicator to create outputs on a P&L basis. But all these board meetings that focus on outputs and lag, they're not serving the company. They're not serving anything, right? They're just lagging all the time behind their own results. I was guilty of it when I ran a company, and I had to learn to do it better. But the entrepreneurship innovation to impact journey requires putting impact on the same footing and with the same intensity as everything else you do on the basis of your P&L management. In fact, on a higher footing, because that's why the P&L deserves the right to exist.
And I was on a board call last night with a startup that I work with. And some of these things, we weren't really having a conversation about impact. We were having a conversation about minutia in some cases, part of the conversation. Some of it was really good. But and it's a reminder that there's a discipline to doing this too, right? Is if we really want to be driving in a particular direction, we have to keep those metrics front and center in order to keep going. And when the goalpost changes, when we have to rethink things, that we do, and that's
Absolutely.
critical. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were talking before, there's this terrible question that we all need to learn to reject. And the question is, are you making money or are you contributing to the planet in some way? The answer to that question is yes,
Mm.
period. But we've somehow learned or expected that if we waive this horrible term externalities,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a free pass to divide the ability to make great financial returns from the ability to create impact because we've outsourced, we've we've off balance sheet, we put off balance sheet the negative impacts that you're responsible for. And so we've created whole decades of experience that somehow capitalism is about privatizing gains and socializing losses, and we become addicted to that. Your point about being disciplined is once you answer the question, yes. Once you say, you know what, are you making money or are you impacting the planet? Yes. Once you say that, you have to prove it. That's the discipline part. You can't just be hand wavy. And where's the proof? Now I'm back to an impact framing roadmap that tells me, am I delivering the units of impact in the time frame I've committed to or not? This is how business works. We just have lost the language of making impact the reason we're having this conversation about your and my accountability. We default to lag indicators of our P&L responsibility, and we've lost the connective tissue to how impact drives. That's the discipline part.
Yeah. And I wonder if this impact part gets left out of the innovation equation more often than not, because I mean, there's a real terror, right? For those of us who love doing innovation work, it's great. We don't mind. We seem to kind of enjoy the risk part of the conversation. We know that we're going to fail often and with big public flops, and it's kind of just part of the process of getting to the good stuff. But for the rest of humanity that looks like at this stuff, like it's terrifying, especially when there are investors looking over your shoulder and competitors who are just seem like waiting to pounce. How do you make the impact as critical as the ROI?
Yeah, great question. And so many things come to mind. Let me try to channel my thoughts so they're productive. Impact, whether it's societal or not, is what drives your ROI. There's no daylight between financial impact and strategic impact. They are two sides of the same coin.
Mm.
And if you don't understand that, you shouldn't be running a company. Period. They're embedded one in the other. It's an artificial construct that we've created that somehow my financial returns come from something other than my strategic returns. Now, whether or not my strategic returns are impact weighted, or there's nuance in that conversation, but there is no distinction between the two. And so it's really important to embed that understanding, the mindset around impact, the mindset around strategic and financial impact being embedded one in the other. There's a related mindset about this question about strategy and execution. People who divide strategy from execution are insane. They're telling you to breathe by exhaling only. It's a way to choke to death.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bring that up here because the accountability trail is make them the same thing. Exhale and inhale, strategic impact, financial impact, strategy and execution. Now I'm back to my roadmap. Prove to me that you can identify inflection points over time that create impact, twin the strategic and financial impact that come out of it, and let's get going. Are we hitting it or not? Are we hitting it or not? The fear of not hitting it is real. It's palpable. Okay. When you're not hitting it, what do you do? It's no different. We react to not hitting your P&L in a certain way. We'll cut a bunch of people or we make those adjustments. But what do you do when you're not hitting your impact zone, right? Well, you got to act the same way with the same intensity. Your conversation inspired a lot of different thoughts to me in a lot of different ways. One other thing I want to reflect on when you talked about the fear component of impact, I've learned a lot from Mach 49. I'm really lucky to be a board member in residence with them. And the
Can
one
you
thing
just share, just for
oh,
my listeners who don't know what Mach 49 is,
oh,
can you share a little bit about what that is?
sure. Sorry about that. Yeah, Mach
Sure.
49 is a great consulting and service firm that brings venture-driven growth to large-scale corporate enterprises across the globe. And so there's a great book by the company's founder called The Unicorn Within.
Mm.
And
I
so
think I
she,
might have that. At least irritable
yeah,
bowel might go with that. That's what's poking around in there. That's the
yeah. And
unicorn.
so, yeah, the unicorn inside, the unicorn within, unleashing that energy. But one of the things I've learned about this issue of the fear question that I've learned a lot from my time with Mach 49 as a board member resident is teaching people at corporates to think about the option value of being right more than they think about the risk weighted factors associated with being wrong. And there's a mindset shift in there that's dramatic. What if we're right? What and that's the natural entrepreneurial startup spirit because they have nothing but the hope that they'll be right, right? So it's easier in that context. But bringing that mindset helps this question of fear in a corporate setting. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? I get demoted, my budget gets cut, my boss hates me, whatever, right? The whole system is built around punishment for being wrong sometimes instead of, hey, let's create option value around being right and let's create a portfolio of options, any one of whom can unleash the unicorn within. To that equation, to that mindset, we bring this impact framing focus. All right, to unleash the option value of being right,
Mm.
tell me about your venture, your company. What's the strategic impact that defines success? What's the financial impact that defines success? What's the team impact that defines success? And yes, you only get one. You can't tell me 45 things because we can't do 45 things. Which peak are we climbing? It's as if we're at the base of the Himalayas, you and I, Susan, and we sit there and we're geeked up and we have all this energy and ambition and capacity to climb one of the great peaks. And we get psyched up and we say, all right, let's go, let's climb one. 30 days later, Susan, you've headed toward K2. I've headed towards Everest, and the rest of our group is still at base camp. And now 30 days later, we're mad. Like, what the? I thought we agreed on which peak, but we didn't. See, we didn't have the discipline to your question from which peak, to what effect, to what purpose unites us in our journey, or we just waste all our energy, even though we're all going after great peaks. But we don't make the climb because we dissipate our energy by choosing different ones on our own. That's
Yeah.
also part of the discipline. Which peak to which purpose with which team?
Yeah. I mean, and I can hear so many entrepreneurs probably, and you've experienced this too, and having worked with them is that if you don't pick a focus, you will zig and zag until the end of eternity, right? You'll never hit those
Oh
KPIs.
my goodness.
I mean, those goals rather.
Yeah, I have on my in my background a special kind of horror of a certain kind of failure. And it's the failure of good teams who work hard and still lose. That is the most painful experience possible in business to me. A good team works hard and they lose. It's almost like you prefer to work with a bunch of dummies because the failure is easy to explain. Shouldn't have done it. I was dumb. They were dumb. Like that's easy. I don't lose sleep over that one. But the one you lose sleep over, good teams work hard and still fail. And so then you have to ask yourself, well, why does that happen? And all I've been able to see are two reasons why that occurs. One, luck and timing. And I have no way of understanding how to get luckier and better timing. It's just something you got to stay humble to. But the
Yeah.
second, oh, sorry.
No, I'm also thinking like whenever I hear about failure, like there's the inability to hit the goalpost, right? There's an inability. I think that's a really bad sports metaphor. I think I screwed that up. I don't think you want to hit the goalpost. I think you probably want to get the ball through it, but the inability to hit the milestones that you're looking for, but also the inability to communicate to partners, to vendors, to team members, et cetera. So often, and I'm biased because this is my work, but it's the communication effort that fails among these good people because they haven't sufficiently articulated and then as a result not been able to execute on the thing. And I don't want to keep it in the abstract necessarily. I just think that if we don't articulate three really important things, number one, what is the shift happening in the world that makes this urgent and important now? If we can't articulate what that catalyst is for the work that we're doing, then we're screwed. Step two is, can we make it easy for people to follow on how to go with us up Everest? So can we look backward and say, look how far we've come? Look at the investments that have been made prior to us getting it here and the shifts in mindset, the shifts in resources, the shifts in business model that it's taken to get us to this point. And we know that because we've been able to look backwards and get it done, that we can do it moving forward. So that's the other part of storytelling we call breadcrumbing. That means you have to look backward in order to look forward. We can do it. The customer can do it. The vendor can do it. We can get it done. And then this last piece is, especially within innovation, when you're telling the story, is to the listener, whether it's a team member or a customer, is that you're not alone. If I'm going to ask you to embark in this innovation journey with me, I'm going to be there with you, customer, to make sure we hit your impact goals. I'm not just going to sell you a product and walk away. This is not just a transactional thing. We're going to get to the promised land together. And I think if those three criteria aren't met from the comm side, then you're really making life much harder for yourself. And I often see this is where good people fail because they can't articulate those three really critical points.
I love it. I mean, I've loved this in the podcast and the focus on storytelling in these ways. And so what I've internalized from that in my own way is if I look at two reasons why good teams work hard fail, luck and timing, I don't know what to do about it. But the second one is about focus. See, for me, it's more than comms. I know you meant it as more than comms
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
of course.
But when we look at focus, this thing we all say we need to do, but we're not good at, right? And so how do you say no to things? How do you choose the one as opposed to the many? And then when you make the focus, how do you measure it? Measurement is challenging because the only things worth measuring are hard to measure. Most of us run away from the difficulty of measure. Now we're back to lagging indicators that don't tell you anything because the leading indicators are difficult. And then the third piece, focus and measurement, the third piece is what you were describing to me in my world, the three components of storytelling that you just described. That's a system of confidence to drive focus and measurement by you, by your team, by your customers, by your stakeholders. It's a system of confidence. For me, that shows up in the kind of comms requirements you've talked about, but it also shows up in this thing I keep on referring to as a roadmap, a visual tool that drives action out of all this complexity. My dream state for comms is that I don't talk to anybody. My roadmap is so evident, it never happens. But my roadmap is so self-evident that it drives action out of complexity. I don't want to drive more complexity out of complexity. I don't want to drive, Lord, I don't want to drive more meetings out of complexity. I want to drive
No.
action out of complexity, but I need a roadmap to do it. I need a visual tool that drives me this way so I can narrate it. I can embrace it in the ways you described. I can have others come to me for it. If you can do that, it's an enormous competitive advantage. Enormous. And I think, I mean, that's the spirit why you described it. But that's how it hooks into my world around this impact framing, a system of confidence from a visual tool that drives action that we can define, align, and execute. And communicating about it is a vital part of defining, aligning, and executing.
Define, align, and execute.
Define, align, execute. Define, align, execute. People who know me, they just mumble that at me when I walk by. Define, align, execute. Define, align, execute. Define, align, execute. Define, align, execute. Yes, define, align, and execute. That's how innovation comes to life, and that's how you deserve the privilege of trying to lead an innovation effort. You're committed to defining, aligning, and executing. That's the job. And yeah, so the mantra is big to me.
Yeah. Well, we are coming up on the hour, so I want to ask you the three important questions I ask everybody who comes on this show. What is the greatest innovation of all time?
I knew these were coming, and I told myself I'd react well when we come there. So, but I didn't prep. So the greatest innovation of all time, voting.
Voting. I have
Yeah,
never heard that on the show. We're up to about 175 episodes. I've never heard that before.
yeah.
Wow.
We got 25 days to get some votes right in the US. Voting. It's this incredible gift that humanity has given to humanity. And I find myself hard pressed to think of an innovation more important than voting.
Well said. Well said. If you had the opportunity to join any innovation team in the course of human history, what would it be?
Every time someone has answered this question on your podcast, I've agreed with him and her. I've every time. Oh, yes, I would love that one. I get excited about so I am. I love them all, but I promised myself I'd react in the moment. And so what comes to me now at this moment when you ask that question is as I think about innovation is committing yourself to something greater than yourself, to create results far beyond entrepreneurial results, far beyond your capacity for an impact. I suppose today my answer would be the Apollo team that first put a human on the moon.
It's a
Uh,
good one.
that group, that the commitment they had to the unknown and solving grindingly daily these incredible challenges because they were committed to a vision of daily, constant, grinding innovation that had an impact for humanity about accomplishing something that was just unthinkable, not getting confused about impact versus KPIs. I suppose to answer the question today, I would say being on that first Apollo team. But honestly, Susan, everybody who's answered that question for you, I've written it down. So, oh God, that would have been great. I would have loved to be on that team.
And so my last one is, what's an innovation that you wished existed that doesn't exist today?
Oh, yeah. I'm hopeful that AI, so on the verge of existing today is I guess where I'm taking it. But the thing that inspires me the most about the potential for AI in our lives now is what I'm seeing in some areas as how it creates more empathy, how this technology that's emerging that has all the alarm bezels that people talk about, but some of the use cases I've seen emerging that create more empathy in us is an innovation I'm eager for. I've seen, for instance, I've seen doctors practice brutal conversations that they're about to have with patients and patients' families. I've seen them practice this with AI to get the wording right,
Wow.
to get their empathy right. That has impacted me, and I'm not an expert in this arena at all. But when you talk about wish for, I wish for more empathy, and I wish for technology and other innovations to make us all more empathetic to each other, to others, to those we don't know. And I'm an eager optimist that there's something in this wave of AI coming forward that will unleash empathetic innovations that will improve us as people and us as businesses. And I guess that's the one I would respond to today.
Wow. Well, from your lips to a higher power's ears, that's incredible. And to the medical profession to take note as well. It's fascinating to me that that's your answer. My first job out of college was working at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and often acting as a Spanish translator in that organization. And I can remember doctors looking down at their files and saying, just looking at the files, not even making eye contact with the patient and saying, okay, well, let Miss Hernandez know that the cancer has spread to her brain, and there's really not much more that we can do at this point. And so let her know that we'll be setting her up with palliative care. Okay. Okay. And as a 22-year-old recent college
Yeah.
graduate, not equipped with the skills necessarily to convey that, not just in English in an empathetic way, but then to translate that into Spanish into to this person whose life was about to change pretty dramatically, was shocking. Was shocking. And it's probably why I never smoked more cigarettes in my life than when I worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, because I had no other mechanism of dissipating the anxiety that was going through me at
Yeah.
the time.
Well, and this question of empathy in that setting, of course, is dramatic in the ways you described it. But for businesses in general, why do we hate every airline and every credit card? I don't know, whatever. The inability to create a business model around empathy and their customer service is what's killing them and killing us. And so there's a range of empathy and agentic AI that hopefully will bring some of that forward. This is a huge topic in the incredibly personal and painful way you just described it, but also in the on the ground. And so it's an innovation arena I'm really interested in, to respond to your first question. And I think it has application in a lot of different ways that are inspiring when we think about empathy as a unit of impact that creates more returns for us. Doctor, patient returns, company, customer returns. I just think there's a lot of opportunity in empathy, and I think there's a lot of innovation to come in that arena.
Yes. So we'll be creating impact frameworks around empathy, and that would be phenomenal.
It would indeed.
Well, Rob, I can't thank you enough. If people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Oh, well, good question. So I'm happy to give my email out. It's robmajteles@gmail.com. I
And
am.
maybe on LinkedIn is an easy way to
Yeah.
find you as well.
Yeah. Rob Majteles on LinkedIn. I'm active on Twitter, although it disturbs me every day more and more. I don't know how much longer I'll be there. I'm active on LinkedIn if I can be. I never used it before the last couple of years, but it seems to be useful. Blue Sky. I try to, this next third of my career, I'm dedicating to impact in the ways we described. And so I'm trying to do a better job at putting myself out into the universe in any way that can be helpful to people. And so you can find, I'm easy to find, and I like being found. If I can be helpful to anybody, my email is good, LinkedIn is good. I don't know, Twitter, Blue Sky, whatever you got, I'm here. I want to talk to you about impact.
Fantastic. Rob Majteles, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you, Susan. It's a real thrill. Thank you.